What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Draft Hub, and I am super excited to get this video out to you guys. It is the start of a new series on the channel. We are going to be predicting every single FBS college football game for week one of the college football season. Now, admittedly, I have started this relatively late. I'm going to be recording this video at 5 o'clock exactly on Friday. So, a little last minute. I just thought of the idea. I just got some time for it today. And I figured, you know what? I might as well make this a new series. This is a college football channel, including NFL draft and NFL. So why not do it now? So I apologize for missing about, a quarter of the games that are going to be going on during week one. We are going to be keeping a record as we go along. I'm going to be doing this every week. I'm also going to be doing this for the NFL. So if you guys aren't aware, I just completed my college football predictions series with all the different conferences. So we're going to be doing college football predictions during the year. Let's clarify that. During the year, the quick content update is going to be the college football predictions every week. Then we're going to do NFL predictions every single week. We are also going to be doing player profiles that I'm bringing over from my old channel from the mock draft guy. So that's going to be super exciting. That's going to be covering. I'm going to try and get to about 100 of the top prospects. That's what I usually try and strive for. I'm also going to be doing NFL draft gems. So those are shorts on the channel as well. We're going to have a really good time here. Then I'm going to sprinkle in a mock draft here or two. So it's going to be a really good time. So if you're new to the channel, if you just clicked on this, I apologize for the way this looks. I'm going to try and get, as time goes on, I'm going to try and get some graphics. So I'm not just sitting here on ESPN and just circling teams that I'm going to be picking. So this is what it's going to look like for week one, probably week two as well. I have a very, very busy week coming up. So don't know how much free time I'll have next week, but for the first couple of weeks, this is what it's going to look like. Hopefully it will change over time. But without further delay, let's get into it. So we're going to start on the Saturday slate of games, even though technically none of the Friday games have gone on. By the time this goes up, most of those games are going to be in progress or over at that point. So let's start with Saturday. So quite possibly the best matchup of week one is the first game that we're going to talk about. Now, also, week one and week two are kind of a lot of cupcake games. I'm not going to be going too much into depth because there are so many games on a slate in the college football season. I'm not going to be going like 5 minutes per game. We're going to do a quick synopsis of what I think, and then that's how we're going to move on. So with this game here, you have Texas and Ohio State, which could still be potentially a college football playoff or a college football championship preview. And that's in week one. So we're getting an amazing game week one. Really, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the games that I think are going to be more evenly matched. So this one, obviously, you have number one against number three. I don't remember the last time number one versus number three faced off in week one. So that's super awesome that we get this. We also get it at 12 o'clock too, so we don't have to wait all day for this one. But yeah, I'm going to pick Texas in this. I do think that if this game was halfway through the season, I would say Ohio State probably would have a better chance. I think Texas is just more glued at more important positions. You have OSU, you have Julian Sayin, who's taking over the starting spot. They have had quite a lot of roster turnover this past year. So I'm going to say that this is one of the least talented rosters as a whole that we've seen from Ohio State in the last 3 or 4 years. And that's really, really saying something, but I do think it is true. Still, obviously, a team that I think is going to be favored for the championship overall. But I do think Texas edges Ohio State here in this week one matchup. Moving on to the next game here, you have Syracuse at Tennessee. This is the first game post the short Nico Lamalieva era in Tennessee. I think they get the job done. I think Syracuse has one of the hardest schedules in college football this year, and I do expect a massive regress from Syracuse this year in terms of overall record. So I'm going to go with Tennessee to start 1-0. The next matchup here, this is an interesting one because you have basically the entire Marshall team transferred to Southern Miss. So Southern Miss isn't going to be a laughingstock like they were the last couple of years. I believe they went 1-11 last year, but new head coach, new roster, essentially. This is not as easy of a game to call as we would think. But I do think Mississippi State do have the better overall roster, even though I do think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. But we are going to go with Mississippi State starting off 1-0 over Southern Miss. Then you have Florida Atlantic and at Maryland. And I really struggled with this one because Florida Atlantic is a team that I think is going to be better than anticipated this year, to be quite honest with you. I think the offense is certainly going to be there. I don't know if it's going to gel together week one. Same thing on the Maryland side, but I do think Maryland overall have the better athletes and the better overall roster and the weapons. So I am going to go with Maryland over Florida Atlantic. Ball State and Purdue is another game that's really not as easy as you would think to call, but I am going to go with, I might lose right here on this one, but I am going to go with Purdue on this one here. I just think, it's tough. Ball State lost, the best weapon that they had in years in Tanner Koziel, who we did see with Houston last night, got 7 passes for 63 yards, and a touchdown. They did lose him, didn't really replace him with anything. And, Purdue overall do have some pretty decent players. Right away, you think Nitro Tuggle, who has one of the best names in all of college football. So I do think Purdue is going to get the home victory in week one. Northwestern at Tulane. You have new starting quarterback Jake Retzlaff for Tulane. I think Tulane is going to not only challenge for the championship game for the AAC, I think they are going to win the AAC this year. So I do have Tulane over Northwestern and their new starter, Preston Stone. You have Pitt and I think I said this in a previous video when I was going over the record predictions. I don't know how to say this name. I haven't been able to say this name for my entire life, but it's going to be Pitt. Donetsk or whatever. Dunkist. I don't know. I'm making an ass of myself right now trying to say this name, but that's just one of those things that I just can't get right. So if you're watching this and you just laughed at the way I tried to pronounce this college, please in the comment section below do a syllable by syllable pronunciation so I could try and get it right the next time. But regardless, I do think Pitt obviously take the victory here. Eli Holstein is healthy and ready to go. VMI at Navy. This is pretty simple for me. I think Navy is going to challenge for the top spot in the AAC this upcoming year. I do have Navy here. Merrimack at Kent State. And I'll be quite honest with you guys. I do think this is the one win that Kent State get all season. If they don't beat Merrimack, then they are 100% going 0-12. But I do have Kent State over Merrimack here in week one. Moving on down, this could be an upset for a pick here. Toledo at Kentucky. I have Toledo taking it here. We have Toledo at Kentucky here, and I'll be quite honest with you, this might be my biggest upset pick of the week, but I'm going with Toledo over Kentucky. I just think they lost so much on both sides of the ball. I think this is going to be Mark Stoops' worst year at Kentucky to date. Toledo has Tucker Gleason. They have one of the better teams in the group of 5. I do think that they are a sleeper to potentially go undefeated and make the college football playoffs. I truly think they do have an overall awesome roster. They have a pretty easy schedule for the most part. I believe this is their hardest game of the year. I'll be quite honest with you there. I think Kentucky is the hardest game of the year. So I am going with Toledo over Kentucky. Fordham and Boston College. I am going with Boston College here. Pretty straightforward. I do think they have quite a bit of talent on the defensive side that is going to carry this team to probably 5 or 6 wins. I don't think offensively they have as much juice as we've seen in years prior. They still have some pretty good playmakers, but I think Boston College gets the job done over Fordham. Same deal here with West Virginia over Robert Morris. And I hope you guys don't think I'm motoring through these just to make the video shorter. I'm just motoring through these because really there's not too much to talk about with a lot of these matchups. I mean, we're getting cookie cutter FCS versus FBS teams in week one. So I have West Virginia going over Robert Morris. Moving on to UConn and Central Connecticut. I think UConn is going to be a powerhouse of, well, I mean, that's really not saying much. There's only 3 independents, or 2 independents rather. Yeah, UMass joined a conference, so there's only 2 independents, but I think UConn is going to have a 9-win season this year, and they get off to a strong start against Central Connecticut. So I have UConn going over. Then you have Old Dominion at Indiana. Fernando Mendoza's debut for Indiana. I do think he is going to be a top 5 pick in the 2026 NFL draft, so I'm super excited to see how he is going to fare against Old Dominion, who don't sleep on Old Dominion. They are getting back their linebacking core fully healthy. I don't think they win this game. I think it's rather, a blowout for the most part, but Old Dominion could easily go 6-6 or 7-5 and make a bowl game. You have Eastern Kentucky and Louisville. I fully expect Louisville and Isaac Brown to be, forerunners in the ACC. I believe in my ACC prediction video, I had Louisville at the number 3 spot, just missing out on the conference championship game. But yeah, this is a layup for Louisville. I have them easily beating Eastern Kentucky. Same thing with Penn State and Nevada. I mean, what do you want me to say? Nevada's actually been statistically one of the worst FBS teams over like the last 5 years. Penn State is not only the number 2 team in the country going into the season, I think they have the most pro-ready roster of any team in the FBS. I mean, you go up and down the roster on the offensive side and defensive side, you have numerous day 1 and day 2 picks on both sides of the ball. So this is going to be a common trend of this series as the season goes on. Marshall and Georgia. I think Marshall will have an absolutely horrendous season this year. And that's just because of the fact that like 60 players transferred from their team last year. And I'm not making that up. If it isn't 60, I think it's close. It's like 58 or 59. Yeah, that whole debacle at the end of last year where they had to forfeit their bowl game because they physically could not field a team is unbelievably pathetic. But Georgia is going into the season with Gunnar Stockton, who is a little bit unproven. We did see flashes of brilliance. We did see some hiccups along the way. But Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas are going to form one of the better wide receiver duos in the country. I think that he's going to have no problem throwing the football. I think Georgia get right back into the SEC championship game this year. Moving on to, I don't know if I physically said it, but I do have Georgia going over Marshall, if that wasn't clear. Alabama and Florida State. I do think Florida State is going to pose a little bit more of a problem to Alabama than we think. But just as I mentioned with Georgia with Penn State having an unbelievable roster, Georgia having a great roster, Alabama have a ton of pro-ready players as well. I think that, again, they're turning the keys over to Ty Simpson. It's a little bit of an unknown. It's a little bit of an unproven. But I do think it's going to be extremely tough for Ty Simpson to fail with all the talent that he does have around him. But I do expect it's tough. It's tough to not have a better season than the season that Florida State had last year. I believe they went 2-10. I do have them at 8-4, but I do think they lose week 1 against Alabama. That's a tough week 1 draw. Iowa State, coming off of the Dublin Classic win over Kansas State, rolls over South Dakota pretty easily. Friend of the channel, Carter Bell, used to be a wide receiver for South Dakota. I'm not circling this because I'm picking them, by the way. It's Iowa State, I think, gets the easy victory here. Air Force and Bucknell. I am taking Air Force and their quintuple option offense. I do think Air Force does take a slight step back or a lateral step. I don't remember. Did they go 7-5 or 6-6 last year? Something along those lines. They started out really, really hot. But I think Air Force have kind of like a lateral move this year. I think that their schedule is really tough and the offensive pieces just aren't there. They lost a ton on the defensive side too. But yeah, I do think they do get the easy week 1 dub over Bucknell. Then you have UMass and Temple, and this is a tough one for me. I'll be quite honest with you. I do think Temple edges out Massachusetts. I think Temple, in a year's time, is going to be much better than they are now. They have decent pieces. They have a brand new coach in place. UMass just has nothing going for them. I'm sorry. This is a team that I think if I was to pick 1 or 2 teams from the FBS to send back down to the FCS level, it would probably be UMass, and it would probably be Kent State along those lines as well. Maybe Akron as like a close third. But yeah, I do have Temple going into UMass and beating them. Holy Cross and Northern Illinois here. I think Northern Illinois do get the job done. That's another team that did lose a fair bit of talent on both sides of the ball. I think it's going to be very hard for them to replicate their 8-5 season last year, but I mean, they still could, don't get me wrong, but I think they get off to a strong start against Holy Cross this year. Then you have, what am I going to say here? You have Oregon against Montana State. Obviously, it's going to be Oregon. I don't really have too much to say about that. I'm excited to see Dante Moore. I'm excited to see, I think Evan Stewart's out for the season, right? Yeah, Evan Stewart is out for the season. Kenyon Sadiq is someone that I'm very excited to see. Nevada transfer Isaiah World is a tackle that I am very, very enamored with for the 2026 NFL draft. So I'm super excited to see what he could do for the Oregon Ducks. Moving on, you have Maine at Liberty. Again, I do have Liberty. I think it's going to be an exciting season for Liberty. I think they are going to get back to the top of Conference USA, and they get off to a strong start against Maine. Arkansas and Alabama A&M. What do we do with Talon Green? This has been a hot button issue on Twitter for the last few days. I've seen a lot of people are enamored with the athletic ability of Talon Green and the overall size, being 6'5", 225 pounds. But then, of course, with an athletic quarterback that hasn't really put everything together, you always get those, oh, well, maybe they should switch him to wide receiver, or maybe they should switch him to tight end, like they were doing with Lamar Jackson. Like, please, give me a break. The kid's going to figure it out. He was the Arkansas offense last year. I think he totaled like 3,800 total yards and like 32 touchdowns or something. So, I don't think Arkansas. I think Arkansas make a pretty lateral move. Their schedule is rather tough this year, but I think they get off to a strong start against Alabama A&M. Moving on, you have Chattanooga at Memphis. Memphis is another team that I think is going to be right up at the top of their conference. They have such a cookie cutter schedule this year, even though they lost an absolute ton on the offensive side and the defensive side. Right away, you think Chandler Martin on the defensive side. You think of Seth Hennigan on the offensive side. Their schedule is probably one of the easiest in the entire FBS. So I am going with Memphis here. Oklahoma hosting Illinois State in week 1, the start of the John Mateer and Jaden Ott era. Jackson Arnold is officially at Auburn now. John Mateer is going to be a early Heisman favorite, I would think, in this offense. So I expect big things out of Oklahoma this year. I do believe I have them going 8-4 or 9-3 in the SEC this year. So I'm super excited to see how this offense comes together. Just, a ton on both sides of the ball, talent-wise. I think that they're actually going to be back. They're going to be competing for not the top spot, but, one spot in the SEC championship game. Then you have Iowa and UAlbany. This has the makings of like a 10-9 Iowa victory, but exciting things on the offensive side for Iowa. This is already a much better offense, at least passing-wise, than they had last year. It is going to be tough for them to replicate the rushing success of Caleb Johnson, but Iowa does have unbelievable prospects on the defensive side yet again, so I expect this to be an easy win for Iowa. Moving on, Coastal Carolina and Virginia could be a very, very interesting game here, but I do have Virginia going over. Tough go of it for Virginia. Obviously, they lost, Malachi Fields through the transfer, so a little bit of a tough go of it to find that new number one option. But I do think that they either go 5-7 or 6-6 this year. I think it is going to be a relatively easy second half schedule for them. But Coastal Carolina is no pushover. But I do think since we are in Virginia and we are at Scott Stadium, I do think Virginia get it done. Moving on to James Madison and Weber State. Again, I do think this is a pretty straightforward. James Madison does get the dub here. Long Island University, close to home right here. Yeah. So I'm going with the upset over Florida. I'm just kidding. What are you, crazy? That would be the craziest upset ever, in my opinion. Long Island University beating Florida, give me a break. No, but Florida and Billy Napier are expecting big things this year from their very, very talented offense and defense, especially on the defensive side. Quite the talented defensive line there you have with Tyreek Sapp and Caleb Banks. I do think Florida probably hangs a 60 burger, maybe even more, on Long Island University. Kansas State and North Dakota. North Dakota is no pushover, make no mistake about it. Kansas State coming off of a pretty disappointing, I would say, week 0 loss in the Dublin Classic to Iowa State. I do think Kansas State does get the job done. My Texas A&M Aggies taking on UTSA. The Roadrunners aren't going to be as easy of a challenge as we think. I think the line of Texas A&M minus 22.5 is kind of insulting to UTSA. I think they're going to have one of the better offenses they're stacked at wide receiver. Quarterback, they're good. Owen McCown. I think that they're going to be a lot better than people give them credit for. But I do think Texas A&M, my Aggies, do get the job done here. Charleston Southern against Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers keep the connection going. Vanderbilt get off to a strong start to the season because Vanderbilt could very easily repeat their success because the first half of their schedule isn't very hard. They could easily get 4, maybe even 5 wins out of the first 6 games. And then if I'm thinking about this correctly, by the way, and then the last 6 games are absolutely brutal. So, a 7-5 or a 6-6 season is well in the cards again for Vanderbilt. Then you have Austin Peay against Middle Tennessee State. I do have Middle Tennessee State go. This is actually a upset alert game for me, to be quite honest with you. I think it's going to be a lot closer than we think. The line we're not, this is not betting. I just want to let you guys know right off top, but I do sometimes look at the lines and they do interest me. But 9.5 isn't as crazy as you would think. Middle Tennessee State isn't that great. They're in a little bit of a rebuilding era here. I think they'll be better than people give them credit for this year. I think next year is really where we're going to start seeing that talent that they've accrued over the last couple of years of recruiting really take shape. But this year, I do think they could maybe even get 6 or 7 wins, and they get off to a strong start here. Western Kentucky and North Alabama, we're going to go with Western Kentucky here on a dub. You have Southeast Missouri State against Arkansas State. I do like the Red Wolves offense quite a bit this year. I think that they hang like 50 on Southeast Missouri State here. I think Arkansas are going to be one of the top offenses in their conference this year for sure. Morgan State and South Alabama. South Alabama is another team that lost an absolute ton. I think South Alabama would have been a sleeper for the conference championship game if they didn't lose Gio Lopez. So unfortunately, Gio Lopez has transferred to North Carolina. But I do think they go 6-6. I do think that they do go bowling and they get off to a strong start against Morgan State. Troy and Nichols here. Yeah, we're going to go with Troy. I mean, really, what else can I say? I don't think it's going to be a great year for Troy. I do have them close to the bottom of their conference, if I'm not mistaken, off of my predictions. I don't remember. I've done so many of them over the course of like the last 2 or 3 months. That's honestly, they all blend together at a certain point. But I do have Troy going over Nichols here. This is one of the better matchups of, this could potentially steal the show here. LSU against Clemson. You have one of the most unbelievable rosters in the FBS here with Clemson. And then you have a bunch of offensive firepower here with LSU. Transfer wide receivers Nick Anderson, Barry, and Brown are going to bring a ton for Garrett Nussmeier. The defense is revamped through the transfer portal as well. I expect Patrick Payton to have a huge year for them. Mansour Delaney as well. And you have on the Clemson side, the defensive line is unbelievable. The weapons are unbelievable. The quarterback is unbelievable. The secondary is unbelievable. I think Clemson I don't want to say easily. I think Clemson gets off to a very, very strong showing against LSU and could potentially beat LSU by double digits. And you have Michigan and New Mexico, the ushering in of the Bryce Underwood era. I do think that they get off to a very, very strong start against New Mexico. I have Michigan taking the dub. I have extremely high expectations for Texas Tech this year. I have them winning the Big 12, so I've put a lot of my eggs all in Texas Tech's basket. Against Arkansas Pine Bluff, I think it's going to be tough, but I think they eventually get it done. No, I think this roster is completely revamped from top to bottom. I think they're going to be unbelievable this year. I think the offense is going to light it up. The defensive line, led by Stanford transfer David Bailey, is going to be awesome. I think that they're in for a 10 or 11 win season this year and a Big 12 title game berth. Now you have the rough go of it for one of the 2 new FBS teams, Missouri State, going against USC. And again, you want to talk about a revamped offense or just a revamped defense and a awesome offense there. Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon, probably going to be one of the best wide receiver duos in the country this year. I think USC get off to oh my God, that line is absurd against Missouri State. I don't think it's going to be that crazy. It is week 1, so some offenses are going to be more ready to go than others, I do feel like, but I think that's a little harsh, especially for their first ever game in the FBS. They could come out with quite a bit of firepower here, but I do think USC handle Missouri State pretty easily. Louisiana Tech and Southeastern Louisiana. You have Louisiana Tech moving over to where are they going after this year? I forgot. I know Texas State is going over to the new Pac-12, which makes sense, I guess. And Louisiana Tech are going to the Sun Belt. Thank you. Louisiana Tech are going over to the Sun Belt after this year, but I do think it's going to be a rough season for them. But against Southeastern Louisiana, I think they'll be more than fine. UTEP and Utah State, I do believe. Let me check my notes real quick because I did remember most of these off the top of my head. But of course, you forget a couple. Yes, I do have UTEP going into Utah State and winning. I do like UTEP's roster quite a bit this year. I think offensively, they're going to be pretty good. Defensively, they lost a ton through the transfer portal and through graduation, NFL draft, whatever it may be. But Utah State is pretty decimated in their own right. Through the same 3 things that I mentioned before. Utah State, I think, are going to have a pretty brutal season in their own right. But I do think UTEP come into Utah State and get the job done. Georgia State, and Ole Miss. I do think Georgia State is going to be a lot better than people give them credit for. Ole Miss with Austin Simmons, I think Austin Simmons is a sleeper Heisman candidate this year, but I do think Ole Miss have a pretty disappointing season considering how much they just lost on the offensive side and the defensive side. And granted, they do have so much talent too on both sides of the ball still, but it's not as much as we're used to. But I do think Georgia State, unfortunately, get decimated by Ole Miss. BYU and Portland State. Portland State, I feel like, is another team that's going to make the jump over to the FBS sooner rather than later. But taking on BYU, Chase Roberts is an awesome player. I do think that he is a top 5 receiver in the country. I know that's a crazy thing to say, but if you watch his game, his ball tracking ability, his blocking ability, his overall size, you'll see exactly what I see. But I do have BYU beating Portland State. Louisiana and Rice. This is another one that's, I shouldn't even say a toss, but I think Rice are kind of trending in the right direction. They actually had one of the better defenses in terms of yards per play last year in their conference. But that's really just a nice tidbit of information. I do think Louisiana get the job done. I believe, unless I'm thinking of Louisiana Monroe, I think Walker Howard is the new starter at Louisiana. I could be wrong. It could be Louisiana Monroe. I could be getting that completely wrong. But then you have Texas State hosting Eastern Michigan here. I do have Texas State going over. This is my favorite for the Sun Belt Conference. I do think they go out with a bang, and they do win the Sun Belt Conference this year, and then they move over to the Pac-12 with a huge chip on their shoulder. North Texas and Lamar. North Texas moving on from Chandler Morris. But I do think they have a strong season. The offense is still there. The defense needs to improve, but there are pieces in place to have them play much, much better. I have North Texas going over Lamar. Tulsa and Abilene Christian is actually a game that I think will be a lot closer than people think. And I am going to go with Tulsa, regrettably. I do think Abilene Christian certainly put Tulsa on upset watch, but this roster has been decimated. I think they moved on from like their top 14 tacklers from last year. They also gave up 48 points per game last year. This Tulsa team is in absolute turmoil here, but I do think they get one win against Abilene Christian. Then you have SMU against East Texas A&M. Now, mind you, we're going to come back. We're going to circle back to this next week. I'm going to bring this up. I think East Texas A&M really have a rough start to the season. I think they're playing like SMU and then like Florida State or something like that. It is a brutal start to the season for them. But yeah, Kevin Jennings is going to be a Heisman candidate this year. I think SMU is also a team that I think lost a little bit of firepower. I still think they're going to be very, very good. The top defense in the conference last year, I don't think it's going to be as good. They do have the top safety duo in the country, in my opinion, SMU, but I think their schedule is much harder, and I think they're not going to make the title game yet again. But I do have SMU going over East Texas A&M here. New Mexico State and Bryant. Again, this is another one that I'm not really too keen on, but I do have New Mexico State going over Bryant. Fresno State hosting Georgia Southern. I do have the road team in Georgia Southern going over Fresno State, and Fresno State starting off at a very disappointing 0-2. Arizona State and Sam Levitt going up against Northern Arizona. And don't forget, Northern Arizona last year gave Arizona, I know Arizona wasn't great last year, but they gave Arizona quite a run for their money. I believe that game was a lot closer than people thought it was going to be. It was like a weird score. It was like 14-11, I want to say. Arizona beat Northern Arizona. And I believe if someone who's still watching this can go back in time and look at the box score, if I am right on that score, I do believe Ted McMillan had 2 catches for 11 yards or something like that. So very, very interesting game. So they are capable of putting teams on upset watch, but I think Arizona State's way too good for this Northern Arizona team. They have so much talent on both sides of the ball, and I do think a Big 12 title game berth is in their future yet again. You have Washington State taking on Idaho. The Vandals are a team that I desperately want to see back in the FBS. They're just not good enough. Unfortunately, I do miss the Kibby Dome. I do miss the Kibby Dome in the college football games as well. But I do think Washington State get the job done post the John Mateer era. Then you have Oregon State against Cal. This is a pretty tough one, in my opinion. This is a former Pac-12 matchup. Cal is now in the, Big 12, right? Big 12? I think they're in the Big 12. I could be wrong on that. All these teams blend together after a long time, but Cal is in the Big 12 now, and you have Oregon State in the Pac-2, soon to be the new Pac-12 again. I do think Oregon State get it done. I think Cal is in a little bit of a transitional period. They did lose Fernando Mendoza and Caden Ott, and I know that Caden Ott, who the hell is Caden Ott? Jaden Ott, excuse me. I was thinking of Cade Otten. That's kind of funny how their names are a little bit reversed there, but Jaden Ott, yes, they did lose as well. They have the pieces in place. I don't know if they'll put it together week 1 against Oregon State. Hawaii coming off of a feel-good victory against a Power 4 team in Stanford, if that's what you want to call them, at Arizona. I do have Arizona beating Hawaii, though. I do think the awesome story of the Japanese kicker kicking the game-winning field goal, I don't think that is going to happen again in this week. I do think Arizona get the job done. A very, very interesting matchup here in Utah at UCLA. But Utah with Devin Dampier, they have an unbelievable tackle duo. This team is going to be vying for a top spot in the Big 12. I think as long as Devin Dampier could kind of sort of emulate the success that he had at New Mexico last year, I think that Utah is in for a college football playoff berth, and Devin Dampier is in for a sneaky Heisman Trophy run. So I do have Utah going over UCLA. Then you have Colorado State at Washington. Love this game. This is, again, another these two really are former Pac-12 matchups here. I do have Washington going over Colorado State. They did lose quite a bit in their own right. Right away, you think of Torrey Horton is a player that they lost that was so productive for them over the last three years, I believe. And then Washington just have an unbelievable offense. Damon Williams is going to be, I've said this like so many times, but I think he's going to be in the Heisman consideration. I think Jonah Coleman is going to be in Heisman considerations. Denzel Boston is going to be vying for one of the top spots in the 2026 NFL draft class. The defense is certainly revamped. The secondary is really good, headlined by Takario Davis. I think Washington's in for a really good season. Then you have South Carolina and Virginia Tech. Kyron Drones, the return of the healthy Kyron Drones against South Carolina. This team is just super talented on both sides. I want to see a breakout season from Nick Harbor. I want to see like 1,400 receiving yards. There's no reason why a 6'5", 230-pound chiseled track star that runs like a 4.3 can't go for 1,400 yards at the collegiate level. I want to see it. I have South Carolina winning big over Virginia Tech. And then here, you have Miami against Notre Dame. Make no mistake about it. You have Carson Beck. You have Ruben Bain. You have Francis Mauigoa. You have a really, really talented Miami team. Notre Dame is just unbelievably talented. And even with the redshirt freshman starter in CJ Carr, you have Jeremiah Love. You have Jaden Greathouse. You have Malachi Fields now as well. A great offensive line. The defense, while younger than we've seen and a little bit more inexperienced than we've seen in years prior, they're going to be unbelievable this year. I do think they honestly could even go straight back to the college football championship game. I have Notre Dame, number 6 Notre Dame over number 10 Miami. And then with the final game here, Bill Belichick's debut in college football, taking on a very, very tough TCU team led by Josh Hoover. I do think TCU go into North Carolina and get the job done. I think TCU is one of the sleeper teams in the Big 12 this year. I could easily see them going 9-3 or 10-2. North Carolina, I think, are going to wind up like 8-4 or 7-5, and it's just because of the cookie cutter schedule that they do have. But I think TCU is going to pretty easily outpower this North Carolina defense. I'm excited to see what Gio Lopez can do with Bill Belichick, though. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There is my Week 1 predictions for the college football slate. I hope you guys enjoy. Like I said, we will be keeping a record as the season goes on. It's going to be like a ridiculous record. We're going to get way up there as time goes on. But I'm super excited to get this out to you guys. Like I said, I will be working on a different way to show you this, with graphics and everything, not just the ESPN slate. But I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you subscribed. I hope you leave a like. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Enjoy that college football is back. And I will see you in the next one.